welcome to today's second session of our MA in Journalism Media Matters Autumn Seminar Series. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're delighted to be joined by Martin Collins, who is the co-director of Pavee Point Traveller and Roma Centre. Martin's going to be talking on the topic of media and minority representation. But before I pass over to Martin, I want to set the scene a little and give just a small bit of context, a small bit of important context to this topic. I'm assuming the sound is okay for everyone, and you can see the PowerPoints here on. Okay, great. I'll continue. So, anyone who pays attention to the journalism and media climate in general and in Irish terms will be aware of problems that have long since existed with a lack of diversity and representation within the media. The version of the world that we see on our newspapers and our screens tends to reflect dominant political class and power dynamics within that country, and Ireland is no different in that regard. White middle-class men have traditionally held almost all of that power, I suppose, and the version of the world we're presented with in traditional media has tended to reflect those interests. Progress is being made, I think, in terms of content. Relative to 10 years ago, there definitely is a greater diversity of experiences being represented in our media, on the likes of RT, for example, in terms of religion, gender, sexual orientation, people with disabilities. Progress is being made, but its progress will always be limited, while those in charge of content and coverage, media managers, editors, journalists, and other workers within the media remain overwhelmingly white, middle class, and male. And until that changes, we'll continue to see stories that are dominated or framed from that perspective. And this has a very real effect. Tensions and inequities within society become amplified and perpetuated in this environment. So we see this very strongly in terms of how Irish travellers are represented in the media, which Martin will be talking about more here. And work by numerous academics here in UL and elsewhere have repeatedly highlighted the outcome of this. Myself and Dr. Elaine Baughan recently compared the newspaper coverage of the Carrick Mines fire in 2015, in which 10 members of the travelling community died, several of them young children. And we compared the coverage there to coverage of tragedies on a similar scale involving members of the settled community. And when we did that, we found that the coverage of Carrick Mines was both quantitatively less, it was more depersonalised than usual, and it was framed in a strongly binary way. Even in death, I suppose, we found the tenor of the coverage gave a sense of this being a story of us and them, us being the settled community and them being the travelling community. Our study just looked at the outcome, the end result of the coverage. A question for today perhaps is to consider the reasons for this kinds of coverage. Is it prejudice of journalists, of editors, of readers? Is it deliberate, or is it simply an accumulation of omissions? But the fact is that there are no journalists working for local or national media that I'm aware of, and you know, I'd be happy to be corrected on this, but that come from a traveller background, and very, very few from that come from other minority backgrounds. There is a failure here of media structures, of media management, and it's one that media organisations and universities have to do more to redress. That in universities, we have a duty to encourage more talented students who come from minority and traveller backgrounds to study in media courses. And we're delighted this year to have the first member of the travelling community ever in our MA in journalism course, Martin Ward, who I think is with us today, or if he has been a terrific addition to this year's group, and I look forward to seeing him develop and making inroads in the media industry. And I want to thank the UL Foundation for supporting and helping this outstanding young applicant. I think Sarah Hartnett at the UL Foundation has joined us today. And I also want to thank the Dean of this faculty, Professor Shane Kilcommons, for being such a terrific support and help also. The Department of Journalism will be continuing to actively seek to do more in this area, because we strongly believe that unless journalism becomes a better representation of the society it serves, it can't inform or tell the truth effectively about that society. So that's enough from me. I want to extend just a warm welcome to Martin today. Mr. Martin Collins. Martin is the co-director and the most recognisable face of Pavee Point Traveller and Roma Centre for many years. He's been a really important activist and hugely influential voice for the traveller community for over 30 years. Martin, that probably shocks you to hear that. But
35 at this stage.
35. So he was a human rights commissioner between 2002 and 2007. And he's currently a member of the advisory committee for the Council of Europe Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. So today he's going to be giving us some background about some of the issues faced by the travelling community and some of the problematic ways that the media engages with this. So I think, Martin, you'll be speaking for about 25-30 minutes, and we'll have 10 or 15 minutes for questions at the end, with the view to finishing up at 4 sharp. So I suppose leave the cameras on if you wish, and the mic's off until the end, and just raise a hand if you have a question, or put questions in the chat if you have them, and we'll get to them at the end. So welcome, Martin.
Okay, thank you very much, Fergal, and good afternoon, everyone. And also thanks to Martin Beans for making this happen. I had a chat with Martin Beans there a couple of weeks ago at a festival in Cork, and it was through that conversation that this event is also happening. So I want to acknowledge that. I'll try and speak for even less, so we can leave as much time as possible for questions and answers, and to make it as interactive as we possibly can. So just to give you a little kind of a brief overview of Pavee Point, and I think, Fergal, you have some slides there. We were established in 1985, and it's a national organisation, and it's a partnership organisation comprised of travellers, members of the settled community, and indeed the Roma community. And we operate at both a national level and indeed at an international level. We operate a number of programmes, including primary healthcare programme, men's health. We have a violence against women programme. We have a drugs and alcohol programme, and we used to have a mediation/conflict resolution programme a couple of years ago, but unfortunately the funding for that ceased. So overall, just to say that essentially we are an organisation that advocates for the promotion and the protection of the rights of Roma and travellers in many different spheres: access to health, education, employment, addressing systemic and institutional racism, and dealing with educational inequalities and so forth. I suppose one of the features of Pavee Point is we've always tried to be innovative in our work. We've always tried out or tested new approaches to the work, document the learning from that, disseminate that and share it with other traveller organisations and indeed other relevant stakeholders. So innovation and the piloting of new ideas and new approaches to the work with travellers is really important to us. Traveller identity is a crucial part of our work in Pavee Point, as it is a crucial part of the work of many other traveller organisations. And indeed, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but as we have this event now, it is Traveller Pride Week, and there are over 40 local events happening, right across the country in the different regions, celebrating traveller culture, traveller identity, trying to improve relations between travellers and settled people, and also to highlight the very positive contribution that travellers have made to Irish society. So, the promotion and respect of our ethnicity, our history, our identity, our language, and our traditions is quite important. In fact, it's essential. And as we all know, our history, our identity has been contested by many in academia, sociologists, historians, anthropologists, and linguists, and so on. And for a long time, we actually didn't have any input into these discussions. It was quite elitist. It was, no offence, but it was people, from universities, as I say, very privileged people from the higher echelons of society, and we as a community didn't have any input into those discussions. But suffice to say that we do know that we go back many centuries, and the first oral reference to Travers was actually Tinkers, spelled Tynkers, as opposed to Tinkers, back to the 4th century. And then from the 12th century onwards, we have sporadic written references to the existence of our people on the island. And the reason why there's so little actually written in any of our history books about Travers is we all know that history gets written by the elite, by the privileged, and those with power. And quite often it's the oppressed and minorities and the disadvantaged who don't get a look in effectively. So Travers are essentially, we're looking if we're a mere footnote in any of the historical text. So because there's so little reference to Travers in the history books, that has always been used, if you like, to denigrate or contest the existence of our identity, our culture, and the right to be recognised as an ethnic group. And it also fed into a narrative that was actually quite racist. There was a perception, that we originated from the famine, which is only whatever 150 years ago, and that we were essentially failed settled people who were just dispossessed, took to the roads, etc. So therefore, the approach was one of rehabilitation and assimilation. So there was that, that racist ideology did prevail for many, many centuries. And in fact, it became more pronounced, I would say, in the 1960s, in particular in 1963 with the Commission on Itinerancy, when it spoke about, we wanted to use the term itinerant, which is grossly offensive to our people. We never use the term. But secondly, not secondly, but also the main thrust of that report was defining us as misfits, as dropouts, deviants, people who need to be civilized and normalized. And it actually it used the terminology, the final solution. That's really reckless, dangerous language. And we have heard that sort of rhetoric before in other contexts, in particular, during World War II and the Nazi regime, where they spoke about the final solution. That terminology was also spoken about in relation to our people. So anyway, so because of centuries of denial of culture, denial of identity, denial of language, and being perceived as deviants and dropouts, there was a lot of internalized oppression, I could say, where Travers, a significant number were ashamed, didn't want to identify as Travers, didn't feel, confident or have pride in their identity. And so Pavee Point, and indeed many other travel groups, organised various initiatives, including Travel Pride Week, obviously, that I referenced earlier on, about building pride and building cultural resilience within the community. But our efforts paid off on the 1st of March 2017, when the state officially and unequivocally recognised Travers as a minority ethnic group. And that is about pride, that is about confidence, that is about self-esteem, that is about cultural resilience. So in terms of racism and discrimination, look, it's well documented. It's not just a case of Pavee Point or any other travel organisations, conducting our own research and then putting it on the table. There's independent, credible research from organisations such as the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, ESRI, Economic, Social and Research Institute, and indeed other international bodies such as FRA, the Fundamental Rights Agency, which is a European Union agency. And they have all concluded that travellers experience high levels of discrimination and exclusion in Irish society. And we see the manifestations of that in health inequalities, education, accommodation, and so forth. And again, you just have, I think you have some stats there in front of you, so I'm kind of moving on quite fast. But there was a recent development you might have seen only a few months back, I think about 4 months back, where Pontins in the UK had effectively a blanket ban on travellers. Travellers couldn't get bookings in Pontins, and the UK Human Rights Commission carried out an investigation into it, and their conclusions were very clear that there was an inherent racism both in policy and the culture and the practice of Pontins and in relation to travellers. And then moving on, again, just in terms of the life expectancy, we can see there are two charts. The one on the right, well, certainly on my right, reflects the population grid within the settled community. And then the one on the left, you can see, reflects the traveller population. And as you can see, at the base, we're quite plump, if I can use that term. And we know that over 60% of travellers are under 25 years of age and 42% are under 15. But as we get up the grid, as it were, the life expectancy is really bad. In 2008, we only found 8 travellers in the whole country over 80 years of age. The average life expectancy of a traveller man is about 63, and the average life expectancy of a traveller woman is about 68. So a traveller man lives on average 15 years less than his settled counterpart, and a traveller woman lives on average 12 years less than her settled counterpart. So again, I would argue that's a manifestation of the institutionalised and systemic racism in Irish society. And then moving on, again, it's well documented about the living conditions and, you know, overcrowding, local authorities not fulfilling their obligations, not spending their allocated budgets. We know, for example, that almost 40% of travellers are actually homeless, 40%, and we'll be actually launching a report to that effect in the next couple of weeks. So again, the living conditions is very well documented. And this, again, is a manifestation of the racism, because local authorities are not stepping up to the plate and fulfilling their obligations. But for some local authorities who do make an effort, they are met with a very strong opposition at local level, you know, fueled by anti-travel racism, essentially. And then, look, this stuff is really available on our web if people want to look at it. And then you can just look at the educational inequalities. And then I made reference to the FRA survey and so forth. But in terms of the media, look, none of us are value free. And that's the bottom line. We all have to recognise we all carry a set of values and beliefs. And that influences how we think. It influences how we interact and how we perceive other people. And I think it's something in this context that journalists, program makers, editors and researchers need to be very conscious of, that, as I say, none of us are value free, and it does influence our work in many ways. And I think journalists need to be aware that, you know, at the stroke of a pen, if they're writing an article, you know, it can undermine 5, maybe 10 years of hard slogging by travellers and traveller organisations to change perceptions, to challenge racism, and to improve harmonious relations between ourselves and the majority population. So, you know, journalists need to be very cognizant of it. They need to be very sensitive to it, and there is a need for anti-racism training for journalists, as indeed for other disciplines, you know, whether it's the guards or teaching or social workers or local authority officials. So I think it's something to be that they need to be very conscious of. And I would say overall, while there is some slight improvements in the media in recent years, and that's really as a result of the work of traveller organisations overall, but nonetheless, you know, there's still many challenges remaining to get, you know, balanced, accurate, sensitive reporting done on travellers. You know, quite often we still have journalists identifying the ethnic identity of our people when it's not even relevant to the issue at hand, you know, and so I mean, that's a very simple thing, you know, that journalists just need to be aware of, that you don't, and it's in the NUJ guidelines, the National Union of Journalism, it's in their guidelines that you don't mention anybody's ethnic identity unless it's strictly relevant to the issue at hand. But quite often that is not the case. We see travellers being identified in the media when it's not relevant. So, for example, you know, if you have newsworthy stories involving, you know, gay people, or, you know, people from the LGBTI community, or people with disabilities, or black people, you don't reference the fact, you know, that, you know, he or she was black, or he or she had a disability, or somebody's sexual orientation, unless it's strictly relevant. But yet it seems to be routine almost, and normal to identify travellers, particularly around court cases, but not just court cases. So that's something that needs to be addressed. I think what the media also need to do is stop problematizing travellers. We only get invited onto the media when there's a traveller issue, as it were, in inverted commas, or a traveller story. It might be, you know, around a feud, or, you know, whatever, an eviction taking place, and that needs to change, because it kind of pigeonholes travellers as if we can only make comment, or we can only analyse traveller issues. You know, we can do a lot more than that. You know, we have views, and we can make comments around the economy, around whether Ireland should be a member of the European Union or not, around religion, politics. And I think it's really important that we start mainstreaming travellers in the media. You know, I'd like to see travellers on the talk shows, on the current affairs programme, talking about issues other than traveller issues. you know, and again, it's a bit of pigeonholing and it's a bit of stereotyping of travellers that we're only capable of talking about issues, you know, that affect us, when that is not the case. So I think that's a challenge for the media as well. And then over the years, we've also had issues where media people wouldn't want me or wouldn't want other traveller activists like Catherine Joyce or Bridget Quilligan down in Kerry. You know, they wanted a real traveller, you know, a traveller from the side of the road living in a trailer. And it's actually quite insulting and very offensive to people like Bridget Quilligan and myself and many other traveller activists, you know, and really it's very exploitative. They want to interview a traveller and maybe even have a traveller on the show who's never done public speaking, has no media training, up against a politician who are very polished speakers who avail of, you know, the media communications experts. And so we retain the right to nominate our spokespersons. And that's really important. And the media shouldn't be trying to dictate who they want to speak to and who they shouldn't. You know, if they want to contact the Irish Travel Movement, Pavee Point, or Women's Forum, or any other travel group, we should have the right to decide who we want to put forward. Again, I think that's really important. And then finally, just to say, you know, media is absolutely and you know, is essential, and it's a cornerstone of our democracy, as we all know. So this is not about, as some people seem to suggest, curbing free speech. It's not about curbing free speech. Free speech is absolutely essential for any thriving democracy. But I would argue, and my colleagues would argue, that free speech does not entitle anybody to incite racism or to incite violence. And there has to be a balance struck, I think, between free speech, which, as I say, is essential to any democratic society, and to protect vulnerable groups from racism, exploitation, and potentially even violence. And at the moment, I'm glad to be able to say that at the moment, the heads of a bill dealing with hate speech and hate crime is at a very advanced stage within the Oireachtas. And we're hoping that by spring, it'll be on the statute books, because we don't have any effective legislation dealing with hate speech and hate crime. What we do have is the 1989 Incitement to Hatred Act, which has proven to be totally ineffective, but also it was developed long before the internet, and you know, and it doesn't deal effectively with internet hate speech and hate crime, which is a big issue for us. Actually, it's one of the biggest issues, as opposed to, if you want to say, mainstream media or whatever the term might be, you know, whether that's broadcast or print. The biggest problem we have is dealing with hate speech on social media, and the high-tech companies are not monitoring their platforms, are not dealing effectively or efficiently, taking this racist filth off their platforms. And we've been highlighting this for quite some time, that they need to act swiftly and effectively in removing material that is racist and inciting violence towards travellers. And then the last point I would make here is, yes, I think you said earlier on, Fergal, we need more ethnic diversity within all of our institutions. And this is something that we in Pavee Point and other travel groups are saying. We need to see more travellers in the Guards. We need to see more travellers in local authorities. We need to see a lot more travellers in the media. We need to see a lot more travellers in universities, not just as students, but, you know, I want to see travellers as lecturers in these universities. There's absolutely no reason why we couldn't be there. Like, the capacity is there, the ambition is there. Quite often what's not there is the opportunities, and there are barriers that need to be addressed, you know, in travellers progressing and becoming lecturers in universities. So we need to be visible in all of the institutions of state. You know, as I said before, travellers should not be just perceived as consumers or recipients or clients of services. We need to be involved in designing and implementing services as well, because, as I said, the capacity is there. So the mainstreaming is really important. And then the last point I would make here is, you made reference, I'm on the Council of Europe Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. And I've been lucky enough to visit a number of countries, and one of them recently was Germany. And I dealt with the Serbian national minority. In Germany, there are 4 constitutionally recognised national minorities. And we met all 4, but in particular the Serbian. And what's quite important to them is actually having access to their own media production, having access and having the resources to produce their own media, their own newsletters, their own newspapers, their own radio programs, even their own television programs. You know, so that's the targeting bit. So we need the targeted affirmative action measures, and that's just an example of it, as well as the mainstreaming, traveller inclusion and traveller visibility in the mainstream media, and not just there when it's a traveller story. It's about normalising travellers in the media, speaking about a wide range of issues, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks ever so much for that, Martin. Really interesting and well-made points there across the board. There's a couple of slides that Martin, you were nearly you'd gone past a couple of the slides before.
You can share those, Fergal. That's no problem. If people want them, you can share them if that's possible. I
will definitely share them with the students. There's some just good points about legislation and NUJ rules in terms of reporting on issues like that. So I'll put it to the floor first of all. Does anybody have any comments or questions that they'd like to come in on? So if you'd like, if you could turn on your cameras, mics, or just raise the hand if anybody wants to come in there. Or into the Shane, the hand is up there. Just
yes,
Shane, good comments. Shane, would you like to come in there?
I would, Fergal. Yeah, thanks a million. Martin, you're very welcome. You won't remember me. A long time ago, when I didn't have grey hair, I invited you down to UCC. You did a law and policy seminar series back in 2002. And you gave a brilliant talk that night just on law and policy in the evening time. A wonderful talk, and again a great talk today. So just two observations. One, I actually must commend you, Fergal. I mean, you're talking about everybody else in terms of that scholarship for Martin Bean's ward, but actually it was your work, it was your leadership. So you need to take the credit for the work behind that and for really driving that initiative. My question for you, Martin, is I sit on the expert review group of An Garda Síochána, which is looking at creating, inclusivity around its training programs and so on. And one of the things that really strikes me is that for the last few years as a volunteer, I've gone to the Garda Youth Awards and brilliant initiatives, Martin, for example, young traveller men in Galway and so on, and how they get involved in their communities and winning awards at that level. But to some extent, it hasn't translated yet into more members of An Garda Síochána coming from traveller communities. And my question, I suppose, for you is that we can recommend it on the one side, on the Garda side, but do you think is there a suspicion among travellers themselves about joining the Gardaí, or do you think that would be a challenge?
Yes, I do. I think it's a huge challenge, but not insurmountable, I would suggest. To be quite frank, that again, this has been very well researched, and very well documented, where there's very low levels of trust and confidence from travellers, in relation to An Garda Síochána. And to be quite honest with you, the majority of travellers, I don't know, probably 99.9% of travellers perceive An Garda Síochána as just another repressive arm of the state, and only representing the interest of, white middle class settled people, essentially. So there is a big body of work there to be done to improve relations. And we have tried, and we continue to try. We've been in Templemore Garda Training College many times, doing training with Phase 3 recruits. We work with the Garda Inclusion and Diversity Unit in Harcourt Square. We were involved in inputting into the Garda Diversity Strategy, which was launched about 2 years ago here in Balbriggan. And we are working obviously with travellers as well, and to encourage travellers to see, An Garda Síochána as a profession that they can, they can be part of. And as far as I know at the moment, I think there's 3 travellers who are in the Guards, and there's a young traveller lad who recently, Owen McDonough, who was accepted into the Garda Training College.
Is he from Galway?
He is.
I think he's our man. I think that was the he was a very impressive young fellow who came from Galway City. Yeah,
I know him very well. He is indeed very impressive indeed, and I wish him the best of luck in that regard. But we want to see a lot more Travers. As I say, in the guards, in you know, in medicine, and architecture and law, and we, you know, there has been a little few small successes which we can build on. You know, Davy Joyce, who was a qualified barrister, who's now giving legal advice within the Oireachtas. You know, we have you know, Eileen Flynn in the Shannon. We have Martin Beans here now doing your course in UL. And there's a few other Travers doing really good stuff across the country as well. So there is a bit of momentum there, and it's about, well, one, sustaining that, and secondly, building on it. You know, building on it.
Thanks, man.
Like one of the most emotional moments of my life was actually about 5 years ago. The Royal College of Surgeons. We all know that, you know, you have to be well heeled to be able to access the Royal College of Surgeons, because it is quite elitist, and you know, only people with money, lots of money, can train to be, you know, train in medicine or to be a doctor. But in all fairness, the Royal College of Surgeons actually contacted us, and they wanted to put in place an affirmative action program, and that's really important, because an affirmative action program has proven to be a very effective tool in recruiting people who are underrepresented in certain spheres of life. And in this case, it was medicine. We were never aware of any Traveller ever that had an opportunity to study medicine in the Royal College of Surgeons. So they got in touch with us. We put in place an affirmative action measure whereby Travellers could come forward and fees would be waived, and they would get other additional incentives, financial and otherwise, to do the medicine course. And a Traveller man, Pat McDonough is his name, from Orme in County Tyrone, he was successful, and he graduated as a doctor. And I remember going to the National Concert Hall in Dublin at his graduation ceremony, and myself and Pancake, you wouldn't know Pancake, you might know her as Rosalie McDonough, but I call her Pancake. I'm a sucker for the old names in the community. I just love the old names, and glad to hear that Martin is insisting on Beans being in his name. You know, my name actually is Coppers within the community. You know, anyway, that's a bit of trivia for you. But anyway, myself and Pancake, Rosalie McDonough, went to the National Concert Hall for his graduation ceremony, and it was a really powerful, emotional day to hear his name being called out, you know, at the ceremony. And I never thought, I'll be quite honest with you, I never thought in my lifetime I would see or witness a member of my own community graduating as a doctor. So he did. He graduated. He worked in Beaumont Hospital for a year, and he's now out in Australia in hospital working. So yeah, I mean, and you know, achievements like that, that's what sustains you. That's what gives you hope to continue, you know, to fight on.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks for that, Martin. And some good points there. So you see evidence of improvement in the last few years that are giving, that's cause for encouragement. Do you, Martin?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Yeah, genuinely, I do. There has been some achievements. I mean, in a whole range of areas, but we're certainly nowhere close to where we want to be. You know, in terms of Travellers' basic human rights being respected by the state. There's lots of challenges still around education, accommodation, health. You know, but at the same time, we do acknowledge there has been some movement in the right direction. I think the biggest achievement I've actually seen over the last 25, 30 years is the emergence of a strong Traveller leadership. Like when I got involved in 1985, there was only, honest to God, the number of Travellers who were activists, you count them on one hand. You know, thankfully, 30 odd years later, we're lucky to have so many Traveller activists, strong, vocal Traveller activists right across the country, men and women at local level and national level, who are trying to, you know, do what they can to promote our people and the rights of our people. So I think our movement is in really good hands. As I said, back in 1985, there was only a handful of Travellers. People like Nan Joyce essentially was on her own. She passed away a couple of years ago. Actually, Nan Joyce, there was a book just published recently, and it's 50 most prominent or 50 most influential women in Irish history, and she's one of them, along with Eileen Flynn. They're both in the top 50. So again, any traveller, and in particular young travellers who might have some identity issues or lack a bit of confidence, when they hear those stories, that has to give them confidence. That has to give them pride. When they look at a book and see a traveller face looking back at them, being in the top 50 most influential women in Ireland. When they look at David Joyce on television, a qualified barrister, that has to give them confidence. When they hear Eileen Flynn speaking in Lishannet, that has to give them confidence, loads of confidence. When they see Johnny Connors, in the cinema or see him on television, that gives travelers confidence. We need role models. We have a good few, but we need more traveller role models to inspire the next generation coming up to build that cultural resilience. Because if you have that strong cultural resilience, you're stronger. You have a stronger character to deal with the racism, the exclusion, and the inequality, and the ridicule and the vilification.
Great. Okay. Thanks. So we've two people have their hands up there. I think Martin and Jasmine afterwards. So we'll start with Martin.
How are you all? First off, thanks a million, Martin, for agreeing to do this talk. I think it's incredibly important. An actual fact, in any setting where potential journalists are going to be working within the media, I think it's important to understand I suppose the difficulties faced by minority or marginalised groups when reading articles about them. I suppose what's quite indicative is we did one of these seminar talks last week, a fantastic one with Ingrid Miley, and there were over 50 people in attendance. And today we started with 23 and we're down to 19. Now, that's not a slight on anyone, but what it does show is that there is a lack of interest when we talk about marginalised groups within the media. So that's something that does have to be challenged. And be that a conversation that happens on campus or off campus, it needs to happen, because the damage being done, as we know, we went through the figures there a while ago, but the figures of male suicide within the travelling community is 6 to 7 times higher. And research has shown that media representation and how we're portrayed plays a large part in that, a massive part in that. One question I'd like to ask you, Martin, I suppose, I was luckily, given a bursary from the UL Foundation. We need to try to ensure that there's funding across the board to get more travellers into positions where they can study journalism. And the reason why I've chosen journalism, and long before I was luckily brought on to UL with this course, and you can look back at nearly all my interviews in the past, before I ever even imagined I could be a journalist, I spoke about the importance of journalism, because journalism has the power to shape the perceptions within society. People read the news and they believe what they read. By and large, they believe what they read. Taking aside fake news, which is only a recent thing that's come about. But other than that, people genuinely believe what they read.
Yeah.
If we get more travellers to write the news, Martin, we have the potential to shape and to challenge the misconceptions, but to shape perceptions. So shouldn't we have some sort of a drive, maybe come together, even with the likes of UL or the UL Foundation, because there is funding out there. There is funding for projects across Europe, especially for marginalised voices within the media. I think we need to get our heads together. Well, yourself, Martin, and the higher ups here that's in this meeting, the people that can actually talk about policies. I think that's where we need to start focusing. But I'll end it on that. But I just want to say it's been a pleasure to watch you and to listen to you talk today, Martin. And I know you're taking time out of your day, and I'm very proud that in my first year studying the masters at UL, that I got to have you within one of the seminars. I would like to see more attendance, but that's something that we can build on, I suppose.
Yeah. I agree. I think there's a lot more work to be done on a number of fronts. Journalism just being one of them. Other disciplines, of course. Travellers might want to get into architecture, more travellers into law, and so on. I spoke about the Serbian community, which have been living in Germany for 800 years. I think there's 70,000 plus, and they have the access to their own means of media production, which is really important. But I remember 25 years ago, actually, RTE, to be fair to them, actually had a travel radio program called On the Tober, And as Martin will note here, on the Tober means on the road. Tober means road in our own language. And it was presented by Michael Collins and Catherine Joyce. People might remember Michael. He was involved in Glenroe many moons ago, playing the character of Johnny Connors. Well, RTE, in all fairness, did actually facilitate, I think it was a 12-week program, a half an hour or something like that every week, where Catherine and Michael got the chance to decide the topics and choose the guest. But that's a long time ago, and we need more of that. We need more of that as well.
Well, sorry, just to interject, but surely, Martin, you can see the importance of traveller journalists, because I've seen it, Martin. You've been on the receiving end quite a lot within the media. If we don't start diversifying newsrooms, and bringing more humanity to the newsrooms, you see what happens is we don't have enough social capital, and that's what we need to build on. It's not just picking and plucking jobs or picking and plucking careers. If we, like, for example, building social capital to me means I'm now the first in my family to go and do something in journalism. Down the line, another person will know that it's quite possible. So it's about building that and setting those trends. But if you want to shape perception, and we want to be able to have a voice within the media, that's what we need to start doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, totally agree with you. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And just important to mention as well, actually, we've another important innovator in terms of our programs here in UL. We've a young fella, a little bit ahead of you, Martin, young Martin Mongan, who's a fourth year in our BA program, who's an outstanding member of that group, and he's almost at the end point of his UL journalism journey. So it'll be exciting to see what he does also. So, Jasmine. Sorry, Martin. Yes.
Sorry, if I could just make one more point before we move on from this. That I think it's really important that for travellers in accessing various disciplines, whether it's in academia or journalism or politics or whatever it might be, there is an issue around identity, and I think this is really important. I mean, there are travellers, and it is their right, and I have to respect it. If they don't want to identify as travellers, and that's actually guaranteed under Article 3 of the Framework Convention on the Protection of National Minorities. Self-identification is really important, so we have to respect that. My preference would be that all travellers would identify, would have the confidence and have the pride to self-identify as being a member of the traveller community. Because I think it's important, as I say, for breaking down barriers, breaking down mistrust, and proving to the majority population that travellers have the intelligence and have the capacity to do, a wide range of work in different disciplines. I've known travellers who have paid a price in order, for the want of a better word, to progress or to achieve in different areas of life, and that price they've paid is actually with their identity. And then I see other issues around, Martin made reference to there, the mental health issues, the suicide rate and depression. For me personally, that's too big of a price to pay, that you have to trade off, essentially, your identity in order to succeed and progress within your chosen discipline. And they're not mutually exclusive, they're compatible. So we need to create more culturally inclusive, welcoming workplaces for all ethnic groups, but in this case we're talking about travellers, and travellers should not have to, and I've seen some, I have relations of my own who've actually had to make a choice between their identity and succeeding in the workplace or the university, whatever it might be, and that should not be the case.
Okay, thanks for that, Martin. I'm going to come to Jasmine Griffin, one of our students, and so Catherine has her hand up. Catherine after Jasmine there. Okay, so Jasmine.
Hi, Martin. How are you? So I've been tasked to write a cover story about this seminar for the Limerick Voice. And I just thought I'd ask you, you touched on the government and what they're doing or not doing, maybe about creating laws and legislation about offensive material online. And obviously the social media age, I don't know if it crept up on us too quickly that we couldn't keep up with social media laws and that, or are they just being lazy about it? But how far away do you think our government are from including laws to remove offensive and racist material online?
We're getting closer for sure, because in the programme for government there was a commitment to introduce more effective laws dealing with hate speech and hate crime, and Minister Helen McEntee did initiate a consultation process, and many human rights organisations were involved in inputting into that, and there's a coalition of 30 NGOs involved in human rights work, and ICCL, the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, they coordinate that group, and we're part of that group as well, as indeed other travel groups are also, and we've been inputting into the legislation, into the draft heads of the bill, and offering amendments and so forth. And the latest we hear is that the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Justice and Equality will be inviting in people to give oral presentations, and we're hoping to be, well, not, I don't mean Pavee Point, but I mean travellers, you know, we're hoping to get a space. So my understanding is next March or April is expected we'll have something on the statute books that will replace the Incitement to Hatred Act, which everybody recognises, and to be fair, even the government have recognised it's not fit for purpose and it predates the internet and all the rest of it.
Very good. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks for that, Jasmine. Over to Catherine Hayes and Sarah. I see you have the hand up as well.
Hi, Fergal. I'm not sure if the camera's working, but I'm here in the newsroom in UL with 11 of our fourth year students. So they're not coming up on your screen, but we have 11 more attendees. And thank you so much, Martin, for your really interesting and important talk. I'm joined here by another Martin Mongan. Fergal mentioned him there. He's one of our final year students, also a member of the Traveller community. And Martin Mongan has been doing some great work this past summer with Wired FM, working on an outreach programme, which I just think really speaks to the point you were trying to make there, Martin Collins, about hearing more traveller voices on the radio as journalists. And I think I'm trying to get Martin Mongan here to just explain even some of the difficulties that, you know, when he was reaching out to people to try and get people to talk. This is Martin Mongan coming in now.
How are you, Martin? How are you keeping? So yeah, I work for Wired FM, which is a community radio station based in Limerick City. And last April, I was hired as an outreach assistant for a bunch of outreach programs that we have running. And one of them is Minker Media, which is the name we came up with. We rolled off the tongue, so we stuck with it. So the most challenging part really that we found was, because it was during COVID, during lockdowns and stuff, so it was all online. So one of the hardest parts we found was getting people to sign up, for the simple fact that we'd reach out to, you know, travel organisations, but we'd never get to speak to individuals themselves who might be interested. There'd always be someone kind of in the middle, and that we'd speak to them, we'd explain what's going on. You know, they'd maybe half listen to it, and then maybe miss bits and pieces, leave it out, and then they bring it back and say, oh, there's a course going, and then they kind of vaguely explain it, and then people aren't interested. So I think that's one of the major things that needs to change. And in terms of the course, we have 5 individuals from Donegal, Galway and Cork. So the entire country is pretty much involved in it. And we're creating 2 one-hour programs, radio packages, and they'll be out soon enough. We're in the process of recording the last few parts of it. We have 2 amazing panels coming up that will be included in it as well. One is based on current affairs and things that you've spoken very well about today, things that need to change. And then the other one is about culture. So we have people that are involved in different parts, whether they're musicians, singers, up and coming, poets, everything. We've poetry in it, we've the whole lot. So I think that's going to be great. And then next year, fingers crossed, when COVID is behind us, we'll focus on a group in Limerick City, most probably, because we came into a lot of difficulty working online. So I think community radio as a whole is just a great way to get ethnic minorities involved, because during my time with Wired as well, for our 25th anniversary, we reached out to community radio stations across the world. And we went to each of the continents in the world because there was enough of us working, and I got Australia, and we spoke to a wonderful station called Triple R Radio in Brisbane, I believe, and they were running a similar course for first generation Australians, trying to get first generation Australians involved in the media, because it's a global issue. It's just the ethnic minority involved is just always losing out. So it's something that everyone's kind of getting involved in, and then Canada doing the same thing with first generation Canadians. So I think maybe getting more people involved in, your community radio, your community paper is definitely the best place to start.
Yeah. No, I think I might have, I'm sure it was you, Martin. I think I met you and a colleague here sometime last year. We had a conversation with Minka Whidden.
I don't think that was me.
Yeah.
Now. You see, a very common name, so.
Yeah, with Kathleen Sherlock. Yeah, she's the coordinator of Minka Whidden, based in Limerick, and we certainly was that radio station, Wired FM, is it?
Yeah, that's Wired. We have Kathleen.
Yeah, no. We definitely had a conversation about a training course for young travellers who want to get involved in radio production.
Yeah, that's it. That was it.
Yeah, no,
I was part of it back then.
I was part of that discussion.
Yeah.
But I think maybe I don't know. Maybe we expect too much too soon. I think it's a slow, gradual process. Incrementally over a period of time. A lot more travellers hopefully will get interested and become involved in journalism. So, but just to go on a slightly different point, there is a hierarchy of oppressions within the media, whether we like it or not. And I just cast your minds back. In 1996, there was a journalist, Mary Ellen Simon, I don't have her here with me. She wrote an absolutely appalling, racist, filthy piece about travellers called the Timber Terror Culture. And basically, she was stereotyping all travellers as being inherently criminal, violent, alcoholic, and all the rest of it. And anyway, the point is, we lodged a complaint with both the Press Council and under the Incitement to Hatred Act, and it didn't succeed. And the point I'm making here is, I've been actually party to 4 complaints to the Press Council on different journalists over the years, Brenda Power, Kevin Myers, and what have you. And we never won one of those cases of the 4. So the Press Council, I think it's something that needs to be looked at as well. I think the threshold might be very high. The burden of proof may be too high. And I'm not actually aware of any other travel organisation succeeding in winning a case with the Press Council against any of the print media. I certainly been party to 4, and we lost all 4. So I don't have any confidence, I'll be quite honest with you. I have no confidence in the Press Council. I don't think it's an effective mechanism. I don't think it can impose dissuasive sanctions or penalties on journalists or newspapers, and that needs to be reviewed and that needs to be looked at. And to be quite honest with you, it's people from the industry policing themselves. It's not, we all know that these how would you say, committees, whatever, if it's from within the industry, people won't have any confidence in it. It's like now with the with experience of women within the armed forces. There's a debate, an internal inquiry or an external, and of course it should be external. Of course it should be totally independent of the Army and the Minister for Defence, Simon Coveney. So these structures need to be totally independent of the industry, and they're not. They're not, absolutely not. It's the industry policing and investigating itself. It's like the old Garda Complaints Board years ago, because I took a complaint where I got a good hiding off a guard and he called me a dirty, scruffy napper. I took a case, but it was the old Garda Complaints Board before we have what we have now, the ombudsperson, the Guard Ombuds Office. It was essentially guards investigating themselves. And look, people have no confidence if the industry is policing itself. So I just thought I'd raise that. But the point I'm making about Mary Ellen Simon anyway, she went on subsequently and she wrote some really offensive comments about athletes in the Paralympics and described them as being grotesque, running down the track with no limbs or whatever. And there was uproar, and rightly so, and she was forced to apologise. But 3 weeks or a month before that, when she wrote the piece about travellers, nobody blinked an eyelid. And that's the normalisation of the embedded racism in the Irish psyche towards travellers. Likewise with Kevin Myers, I'm only using this to make the contrast. Kevin Myers has wrote really racist pieces about travellers over the years. I remember one where he described traveller men in particular as being alcoholic, violent, illiterate, and misogynistic. Again, we took a complaint to at the press council. We lost that. Kevin Myers subsequently made a comment. Now, he accused traveller men of being misogynistic. He subsequently made a comment about single mothers, describing them as parasites and sponging off the state. Such was the uproar, he had to give a public apology, and rightly so, rightly so. But here are these two cases. We got no apology, we got no acknowledgement of the hurt that was inflicted on us and the offence, and people just got on with the business. And that's the point I'm making. That the racism is so embedded in the Irish psyche, it's normalised towards travellers. Now, we know that Kevin Myers more recently wrote a really offensive piece about the Jewish community, and he lost his job as a result of that. So we can't be selective in who we afford human rights to and who we don't afford human rights to. Either human rights for all, that's it. That's the bottom line. You can't be selective.
Okay, thanks. Very good points there, and it's great to see Martin Mongan and Martin Beans just even in little ways so far, like making impacts already, you know, in terms of that project with Wired FM. It's really great to see, Martin. Sorry, the camera of the group there. It's like a cinema watching the in the newsroom, but the camera is turned off, unfortunately, so we can't see it. So, Sarah, would you like to come in there? So Sarah Hartnett from the UL Foundation.
Hi, Martin. You're welcome. I'm conscious we're probably nearly out of time, Fergal, so I'll be brief. I just wanted to ask you, Martin, about traveller participation in education. I don't know, did I read that slide correctly, but did it say that 13% of travellers only complete secondary school? So I was a bit shocked at that, to be honest. I knew it was low, but I didn't expect that it would be that low. And I just wondered, had you know, were there any particular actions that you'd like to see take place to try and redress that? Because obviously that education starts at the core of it, and to get, I suppose, the traveller community to third level, we need to get them through secondary school first. So what are we doing wrong, and how can we, you know, is there anything we can do to address that?
Well, to begin with, yes, you did read it correctly. Only 13% of travellers complete secondary education, compared to 90% in the majority population, or the settled community, whatever terminology you want to use. We know that less than 1% of travellers access a complete university education. And as I have said many times before, we actually have more travellers in prison, in jail, than we do in universities. And I think that's a really sad indictment on our society, that we have more travellers in jail than we do in universities. There's something just drastically sick and dysfunctional about a society that allows that to happen. So I think what we're calling for is a national traveller education strategy. We don't have a strategy. We have a piecemeal, ad hoc approach to supporting travellers' access, participation and outcomes from all the different levels in the education system, from early years right up to university level. So we need a coherent traveller education strategy, as I said, which we don't have. Now, there is a number of problems, of course. I don't know if you've seen that article in the Irish Times today by Kitty Holland, a report that was commissioned by the Department of Education called Out of the Shadows. And it's about travellers' experience in the education system. And it's absolutely frightening. It's in today's Irish Times. It spoke about bullying towards travellers, racism, not just racism from other pupils, but racism from staff, teachers, principals. It's absolutely frightening. And also, what we need as well, traveller history and culture needs to be embedded in the school curriculum. It's not at the moment. Now, there is plans to change that. The NCCA, the National Council for Curriculum Assessment, has set up an expert advisory group consisting obviously of travellers, and they've actually employed a traveller woman called Hannah McGinley, who's the coordinator to develop modules on traveller history and culture, and for this then to be taught in teacher training and then subsequently in schools. And I think that would be really important. When I went to school back in the 80s for 6 years, I only went to primary. At no stage was my identity ever affirmed or validated by the system. I was bombarded with settled history and settled culture, and that was important. I learned a lot, but I got no affirmation who I was as the only traveller boy in the classroom. you know, and then my brother came subsequently. But I was the only Traveller boy in the whole school of 300 settled pupils. So I think it's really important that Traveller history, culture, and identity is embedded in the school curriculum. And again, going back to the point we made earlier on, we'd like to see a lot more Travellers. I think there's 2 Travellers, maybe 3, who are teachers. Hannah McGinley is a qualified teacher, you know, from Galway. Katrina Collins from Navan recently graduated as a teacher. I think there's 3 Travellers who are qualified teachers, but we need to see a lot more of that as well.
Yeah, very good. Good points. Thank you, Martin.
Okay, so I think Catherine, is that another question there, or just the hand up from before?
Apologies, I didn't take my hand down. Thanks, Ferg, and thanks, Martin. We all really enjoyed it here.
Thanks. Okay, well, so look, some fantastic points made there, Martin, and it's just great to see the fire in the belly, you know, after 35 years. Like, you're a great advocate for your community, and long may you continue to be so.
One of many, Fergal. Thanks be to God for that. One of many. Yeah,
thank you. Thanks so much for your time today, and yeah, I think this will have been really helpful for our students, you know, and the need for making these issues like just central to conversations going forward. I mean, the statistics you've shown repeatedly there really are shocking, and they speak for themselves. So, so thanks to everyone for joining us, and particularly thanks to Martin. Just thanks for your time. It was much appreciated. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Nice meeting you, even if it is virtually.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Martin. And I'll share the slides afterwards. Yep. There's a lot of good stats there that would be useful for our students and everyone else. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
okay,
Fergal, for organising.
Thank you.